My mom is the dirtiest person I know. There is a sink in my mother's kitchen right now, probably, as I'm telling you this, filled with 30 dirty dishes. 30. For a household of 4 people. I want you to sit with that number for a second, because by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly how that's possible. I didn't always notice it. When you're a little kid, whatever your house looks like is just what a house looks like. It wasn't until I hit my teenage years that something in my brain went, wait, this isn't normal. Other people's houses don't smell like this. Other people's floors aren't sticky by the front door. My mom was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder before I was even born, so this has never been a used-to-be-different situation for me. This is just who she's always been, as long as I've existed. And part of that has always shown up as this complete disconnect from cleaning. Not laziness exactly. I want to be fair here. Because she cooks constantly, she's in that kitchen from sunrise to way past dinner some days, especially when she's in one of her more manic stretches. She's not sitting still. She's just never once, in my entire childhood, mopped a floor, swept it with a broom. Sure, once in a while. Mopped it? Never. Maybe once or twice a year, on some holiday when family was coming over, the house would get a real scrub, and then within a week, it would slide right back to normal. Let me paint you the picture of normal, because I don't think messy house quite covers it. When my mom cooks, she peels vegetables and just lets the peels fall wherever her hands happen to be over. Not into a trash can, not into a bowl, onto the floor. Directly onto the floor. And then she just keeps cooking, stepping around them like they're not there. Food wrappers, empty condiment bottles, plastic bags. All of it piles up in corners of the kitchen instead of going into the actual trash bin. That is, I promise you, sitting right there in the room with her. When she eats something with a shell or a peel to pistachios, sunflower seeds, whatever. She drops the shells straight onto the dining table or the living room floor. Fish bones, chicken bones, just tossed. I remember one specific afternoon, I was maybe 16, and I watched her crack open a handful of peanuts at the table, one after another, letting every single shell fall onto the floor around her chair like she was feeding pigeons. And something in me just snapped a little. I said, Mom, why don't you just peel stuff into a plastic bag so it's easier to throw away after? Why do you keep dropping shells on the floor like that? She didn't even look up from what she was doing. She just said, it's my house. I can do whatever I want. If you've got a problem, go find somewhere else to live. I sat there for a second just kind of stunned because it wasn't even said with anger, you know? It was said like I was the one being unreasonable for asking. Another time, when I pushed a little harder about it, she looked at me and said, "Are you my mother to tell me what to do?" And that's the thing that stuck with me for years. Not just the mess. The mess is the mess. But the complete refusal to even engage with the idea that it might be a problem. There was no version of that conversation where she considered it. It was a wall every single time. So picture the floor around that dining table. It's covered in dried food gunk. Crumbs, little bits of shell and peel, ground into the tile, because my mom and my younger brother both have the exact same habit of just letting things drop wherever they stand. Neither of them washes their hands before cooking or eating either, which is its own separate horror. I try not to think about too hard. When my mom does the dishes, half the time she can't find the soap, or doesn't bother looking for it, so she just rinses them underwater and stacks them back in the cupboard. Still oily, still with bits of food stuck to them. She uses old rag washcloths instead of sponges. And here's the part that used to genuinely make me want to scream. She thinks sponges don't clean as well, so whenever she finds one of mine, she throws it away. I learned to hide my sponge. That's a real sentence I just said about my own mother's house. When I visit, I bring my own dish soap and I hide my own sponge somewhere she won't find it, so that when I wash my own plate, I know it's actually clean, because I've picked up enough of her clean dishes that still felt slick with grease to know I can't trust the cupboard. I tried fighting it for years. I want you to know that. This wasn't me giving up without a fight. I would come home and I'd clean the sink, mop the floor, bag up the trash sitting in the corners, wipe down the counters until they didn't feel tacky anymore. And for one day, maybe two, the house would look like somewhere a person could comfortably exist. And then I wake up the next morning to a sink stacked with dishes again. Not because 4 people ate a lot of food, because my mom, during her more manic stretches, cooks nonstop, morning until night, and somehow manages to use 2 or 3 plates just to serve the same single dish. More dishes to wash, every single time, like she's actively working against whatever progress got made the day before. There's one specific memory that still gets to me more than almost anything else. About 2 years ago, right before I left for school, I did a full deep clean of the house. My old bedroom especially, the one that's my brother's now. I cleared every bit of trash out of it myself before I left. It was spotless. No cans, no wrappers, nothing. I remember standing in the doorway, looking at it and feeling this small, strange pride, like, okay, at least I'm leaving it decent. I came back for a visit a while later, walked into that same room, and it was buried. Literally hundreds of soda cans and water bottles scattered across the floor, trash piled in the corners, and the kitchen had gotten even worse than I remembered it. I stood there in the doorway just staring at it, feeling like all that work I'd put in before I left had just evaporated, like it never happened at all. I brought it up to my parents. I said something has to change. My brother needs to actually clean up after himself. This isn't fair to expect me to fix every time I'm home. And my dad, this is the part that really gets under my skin, basically told me it wasn't my brother's responsibility because he's a boy and it's just not a boy thing to clean up after himself. My 14-year-old brother is allowed to eat full meals in the living room and leave his dirty plate wherever he wants because my mom will just pick it up after him. No consequence, no expectation. Just me, apparently, being the only person in that house who's supposed to care whether it's livable. So here I am, 2 weeks into a visit home, and I can already feel myself unraveling a little. Every day I clean something, and every day it slides right back, sometimes worse than before I touched it. I know this house is filthy. I'm not exaggerating for effect. The floor around that dining table is genuinely disgusting, covered in dried gunk and dirt that's been ground in for who knows how long. And I know my mom will never feel a shred of guilt about any of it, because in her mind it's her house, and that settles the matter completely. I keep wondering what it would even feel like to walk into a house that just stays clean, where you wipe a counter and it's still wiped the next morning, where nobody's stepping over chicken bones on their way to the fridge. I know that probably sounds like such a small, ordinary thing to want, but from where I'm standing right now, it feels like something other people got handed in life that I never did. I don't really have some big resolution here. I'm not going to pretend I figured out how to fix any of this because I've tried more than once and it never sticks. All I know is that writing this out loud, saying it plainly instead of just carrying it around in my chest, makes the weight of it feel just a little bit lighter. Maybe that's enough for tonight. I just wish, somewhere out there in some other version of my life, I'd been born into a house where the floor was just, clean. My husband's ex won't pay half our stepdaughter's ER bill because apparently she needs to learn responsibility. $300, that's what it cost us for my stepdaughter to get IV fluids because she was so dehydrated she couldn't even keep water down. And her own mother's response to splitting that bill was that she needs to learn a lesson about responsibility. I'm still trying to figure out what lesson there is to learn from getting a stomach virus. Let me start from the beginning because I want you to understand exactly who we're talking about here. My stepdaughter, I'll call her Ebony, is 21. She lives with us full time, by her own choice. Not because anyone forced that arrangement. She's in community college, she works a part-time job, she mows our lawn without anyone asking her to, she picks up her younger siblings from school on the days we can't, she pays for her own gas, her own clothes, her textbooks, her recreation money, and she covers half of her own car payment every single month. If you made a list of responsible young adults, she'd be sitting near the top of it. I'm telling you all of this up front because it matters for what happens next. This isn't a story about a kid who blows through money on nonsense and needs a wake-up call. This is a story about a hospital bill. A few days ago, Ebony started feeling sick. Just a stomach thing, we figured, one of those bugs that goes around. But it didn't get better, it got worse. By the second day, she couldn't hold down water, not even small sips, and she was getting weaker and paler by the hour. My husband and I looked at each other and just said, okay, we're going. We're not waiting this out. We got her to the ER, and I remember standing next to her bed while a nurse tried to find a vein, Ebony wincing, apologizing for wincing. Because that's just the kind of kid she is, apologizing for having a body that needed help. They ran a bunch of tests, nothing alarming showed up, which was a relief, but also frustrating in that way where you want an answer and all you get is bad stomach virus. They gave her IV fluids and some anti-nausea medication that I swear worked so fast it was like watching color come back into her face in real time. Within an hour she was sitting up, talking, almost joking around. That medication is genuinely magic. We got sent home with prescriptions to keep her stable. And a bill, $300, just for the copay. Not even the full cost, just our share of it, because that's apparently what it costs in this country to be treated for dehydration. My husband, being reasonable, texted Ebony's mom to update her and ask if she could cover half. $150. For context, this isn't some estranged parent we never talked to. She's historically chipped in for medical stuff before, even though she doesn't help with tuition, doesn't help with the car, doesn't help with basically anything else in Ebony's life day to day. Medical bills have always been the one thing she's stepped up for, not this time. Her response, and I'm going to try to get this as close to word for word as I can remember, was that she couldn't help because Ebony needs to learn a lesson about responsibility by covering her own expenses. I read that text over my husband's shoulder and just stood there blinking at it for a second. Responsibility. As if the emergency room visit was the result of Ebony overdrawing her bank account buying concert tickets. As if getting violently dehydrated from a stomach bug is some kind of moral failing that requires a financial consequence to correct. Here's the thing that gets me the most. If Ebony genuinely needed a lesson in responsibility, I don't know what that lesson would even look like because she's already doing everything right. She's not asking anyone to bail her out of debt she racked up being careless. She's not skipping class or blowing off her job. She got sick. That's it. That's the whole crime here. Getting sick. My husband tried to push back a little, said something like, "This isn't about teaching her a lesson, she was in the hospital." And her mom basically doubled down, repeating the same line about how kids need to face consequences to build character. At that point, he just kind of gave up arguing, because you can't really reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into in the first place. And look, I get frustrated parents sometimes lean on tough love language when they're trying to justify something, but you can usually tell the difference between actual tough love and a convenient excuse, and this felt like the second one from the start. If she just said, "I don't have the money right now, I'm sorry," I would have completely understood. Money's tight for a lot of people. That's a normal, honest answer. Instead, we got a lecture dressed up as parenting philosophy, aimed at a 21-year-old who mows our lawn on her own initiative and picks her siblings up from school. I keep turning it over in my head, trying to find the version of this where her logic makes sense, and I just can't get there. This is a kid who is already responsible. She didn't ask to get sick. She didn't choose to need an ER visit. She's a full-time student with a part-time retail job, and somehow that's supposed to translate into her single-handedly absorbing a medical bill that a full-grown adult with a full-time income is refusing to split. We paid the whole thing ourselves, obviously. We weren't about to let Ebony go without her medication over $150, or worse, make her feel like getting sick was somehow her fault to fix alone. But it's been sitting with me ever since, this weird simmering anger, because it's so transparent what's actually happening here. This isn't about character building. This is about avoiding a bill and finding language that sounds noble enough to hide behind. So here's what I keep asking myself, and honestly, I'd love to know what you all think too. If you don't have the money, just say you don't have the money. Nobody's going to think less of you for that. But dressing up, I don't want to pay as some kind of life lesson for a kid who is already doing everything right. That's not tough love. That's just an excuse with better packaging. Ebony's fine now, by the way. The medication kicked in, she's back on her feet, back to work, back to picking up her siblings like nothing happened. But I don't think I'll forget how easily her mom reached for that excuse the second money came up. Some lessons really do stick with you, just not the ones you'd expect. Asked my stepbrother to take eggs off his wedding menu, and it opened up something way worse. By the end of that phone call, I wasn't even thinking about the eggs anymore. I was staring at my husband's phone, scrolling through months of messages from a woman who was 3 weeks away from marrying my stepbrother. But I need to back up, because none of that makes sense unless I tell you how it started. My stepbrother Caleb and I have been close since he was 4 years old. I'm 7 years older than him. So growing up, I was the one driving him to practice, making him dinner when our parents worked late, basically a second parent in a lot of ways. When he got engaged to his fiancée, Bree, I was genuinely thrilled. I'd actually known Bree longer than he had. She used to run in the same friend group as me and my husband. I'm the one who brought Caleb to a get-together where they met. Small world, right? I helped plan almost everything for their wedding because I'd been through the process myself and knew how overwhelming it gets. It was going to be a beach ceremony, sunrise wedding, the whole romantic thing. Beautiful idea. Except when I saw the food plan, my stomach dropped. Eggs Benedict for breakfast, a seafood bar running all day, and I have a connective tissue disorder along with a condition that makes my blood pressure crash if I go too long without eating, especially in heat. On top of that, eggs make me violently sick, and seafood can send me into anaphylaxis, so I looked at that menu and realized there was almost nothing on it I could safely eat. I asked Caleb if I could get a substitute meal. Simple ask, right? He said no. I offered to pay for it myself. He said no to that too, telling me he'd feel guilty making me pay for my own food at his wedding. Which, I mean, I'd rather pay than end up in a hospital tent behind the ceremony, but okay. There was no restaurant nearby. My hotel didn't start serving breakfast until after the ceremony would already be over. So I was looking at spending an entire day in brutal heat with pickles and a little cream cheese as my only real options. Now here's the part that should have tipped me off way earlier that something strange was happening. Because I later found out, my aunt, who's also going to this wedding, has a dairy allergy. She asked for a substitution and got one without any pushback at all. Full support, no drama. So why was I the only one getting a wall? I decided to sit down with Caleb in person and just ask him directly. We were at his kitchen table and I said, "Why did everyone else who needed a substitution get one, and I didn't?" He wouldn't look at me. He gave me half answers, talked around it, but the second I mentioned calling the caterer myself, his whole face changed. "Please don't contact the caterer," he said, almost panicked. I sat there thinking, what is going on with you right now? This is a guy I used to pack lunches for. After a few minutes of him dodging, he finally admitted it. The caterer had offered allergy accommodations from the start. Multiple guests had already gotten their meals adjusted. He'd known that the entire time. And then he told me something that genuinely stung. Bree had specifically brought me up when they were going over dietary restrictions, and she'd called my needs annoying. He said he tried to push back from me, but she shut the conversation down completely. I want to ask you something here, because I really don't think I'm crazy for feeling this way. If someone you loved needed a specific meal to not end up hospitalized, would annoying ever cross your mind? Because it never would have crossed mine. I told Caleb straight out, I don't feel safe attending if this is the answer. He got frantic, said he'd talk to her again, and when I said I'd talk to her myself, he got even more uncomfortable. I left that conversation more confused than when I walked in. A few days later, I called Bree directly. This was a woman I'd known for years, someone I actually introduced to my brother in the first place. I asked calmly if there was any way to get a substitute meal, and offered again to pay for it myself. She said no. When I asked why, she told me the accommodation felt too random, and then said, word for word, that I was strong enough to handle some eggs. I actually laughed out loud on the phone, because I genuinely didn't know what that was supposed to mean. I explained again slowly that there was nothing else at the wedding I could eat besides pickles and a little dip, and that wasn't enough food to survive a full day in that heat. She told me to stop complaining and suck it up. That's the moment I knew this wasn't about food anymore. Something else was going on, and I had no idea yet how deep it went. I called Caleb again, told him I just had an unbelievably disrespectful conversation with his fiancée, and he brushed it off as wedding stress. Sure, except everyone else's wedding stress hadn't resulted in them refusing a paying, allergic, disabled family member a plate of food that wouldn't put her in the ER. So I did what a lot of you told me to do from the start. I sent Caleb a message saying I'd bring my own food, and if that was a problem, I simply wouldn't come. He left me on red for 6 hours. When he finally responded, all he said was, "That's fine, just don't make it too noticeable, please." That was it. Nothing else for days. Then, that Friday, one of my closest friends, someone who's been in the same friend group as my husband and Bree for years, told me something over dinner that stopped me cold. She said Bree and my husband had briefly had some kind of talking stage thing back in college, way before I ever met him. It fizzled out fast, apparently, but my friend, who loves a little gossip, said she thought Bree might still have feelings for him. I laughed it off at first, genuinely. But that night I mentioned it to my husband as a joke, and he didn't laugh back. He said it was actually possible. I just stared at him. So I asked to see their messages, and he showed me without hesitating, which I appreciated more than he probably realizes. What I found was a woman who texted him nearly every single day. Nothing overtly inappropriate that I could see. Small talk, plans, the occasional message he never even answered. But far more contact than made sense for two people who barely interact outside group gatherings. Suddenly, her whole attitude about my food made a different kind of sense. Maybe this was never really about eggs. I still don't have proof of anything beyond a theory and some old messages. My husband insists there's nothing there, and honestly, I believe him. But I've asked him to be the one to tell Caleb about the college history. Because if the roles were reversed, I would want to know. That's the least he can do, considering he never mentioned any of it to me himself. As for the wedding, I'm not going empty-handed into someone else's hostility anymore. I'll bring my own food if I go at all, and if that's still too noticeable for them, then honestly, that tells me everything I need to know about where I stand. So here's what I keep asking myself, and maybe you can help me answer it. If the people getting married can't manage basic compassion for a health condition before the wedding even happens, what does that say about the marriage itself? I really do want to know what you would have done in my place. All I know is, I didn't go into this looking for a fight. I just wanted a meal that wouldn't put me in danger. I ended up learning a lot more about my brother's marriage than I ever expected to.